to go on my toes for this. Okay, in our second session, Professor Shamika Ravi, economist, member, Economic Advisory Committee to PM, will make a presentation on elimination of extreme poverty in India and India's growth trajectory.
Well, let's get started. I'll tell you the whole idea of when I was invited to this, which I'm extremely grateful for. This is my second time here. You know, I always use these platforms as an opportunity to first share what is the thinking within the government and what is it influenced by. But there is no one thinking in the government. To every thought that research and people like me will put up, there are alternate thoughts which will come from the political side, it will come from social sides. So there are many aspects to inputs that go into policy making, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about where we have come. Because sometimes, and I'll talk also about the narrative, and I'll give you some data to show that narratives are very important. We cannot wish them away. We cannot say, oh, but we are growing at 8%, 10%. Why isn't everybody happy? Why is there so much opposition? And I think a large part of it is because we don't always know what the objective truth is. And in a country like India, 1.4 billion, there are many lived realities, which means it's not like, you know, everyone is better off the same way. So we are going to look at distributions also of everything, right? Okay, next. Okay, this graph, these are graphs by New York-based NGO based on global data. You know why these are important? This is called the poverty clock. They measure how many people are coming out of poverty every day, in fact every minute. And you can see this is in the midst of the pandemic. You see India is green, which means India is on its way to attaining its first sustainable development goal, which is eradication of poverty. And you see it is green. Of course, we hate this graph because the way they write, you know, they draw the graph, which means we are also working on the shape files. Why they should use the updated and proper maps. But you see, there are many ongoing exercises that happen simultaneously. The thing to learn here is, in the midst of the pandemic, despite such a major blow to global economy, an economy like India remains green, meaning on its path to attaining elimination of extreme poverty in the midst of a global turmoil. The lesson here is we actually outperformed much richer countries. If you look at South Africa, which is 3 times richer than us, if you look at Brazil, which is 2.5 times richer than us. So it's not about how much resource you have, but very importantly, how are you using that resource to overcome a problem as difficult as eradication of poverty. All right? So it's important to recognize that we stayed on the path. Next. This is the latest data. Now we are in the grey zone. What does grey zone mean? Absolute poverty now is less than 3%. Much like the rest of the developed world. Which is why this is such a momentous occasion we are living through, and we must appreciate that in modern India, this is the first time we have actually brought poverty below 3%. We have been talking about poverty elimination now for decades, right? And we have actually managed to do it. There should be a lot more song and dance about an achievement such as this than the way we usually, now it's like, it's, you know, it's expected. We are discounting these major achievements that is happening in, despite the pandemic. Next. This is now SDG 3. It has to do with maternal mortality rate. So now I'm showing you data from the ground in terms of poverty. This is maternal mortality rate. The number of mothers that die for every 1,000 live births. You see, the orange bars are the rate at which the world is reducing MMR. The blue bar is the rate at which India is reducing maternal mortality. We are reducing twice as fast as everybody else. It's a miracle that is happening. And a lot of it is fundamentally based on the fact that we have resources today. We are growing at the rate that we are growing, but not just growth. There are many more affluent countries I just showed you. Today, if you go to South Africa, they are puzzled when they see us, and we are puzzled when we see them. How can such a rich economy, twice, almost 3 times richer, be so unequal? There is no talk of basic amenities. There is no talk of really changing the lives of a certain large segment of the society. So India is an exception. It's important to realize that, of course, we are fast growing, and that is the nice side of the story. What is less understood is what are we doing on the development front. Just look at the rate at which we are doing it. Next, this is infant mortality rate, and on the x-axis you have economic growth, meaning per capita income. Every state of India, whether you look at southern states, western states, poorer states, everybody is reducing infant mortality rate at an unprecedented rate, given economic growth. Your rich states, poor, everybody is reducing infant mortality. It is also an SDG, something we are signatory to, and we are actually achieving it. Next. Now, India is very intolerant, India is becoming violent. Yes, these are anecdotal evidence. For everybody who says India is becoming violent, 3 people will say, no, but that is not my reality. So anecdotes are very difficult to deal with scientifically, right? Because for every anecdote, there is an opposite anecdote. Data, therefore, becomes relatively more objective. These are the number of riots that have happened in India in the last 50 years. Right? It goes beyond 50, actually. Why do I study something like riot? Because the definition is it's well-defined variable, and the definition has not changed over time. It is a violent episode involving 5 or more people for a common purpose, and it is registered in the police station. Now, when you look at what is happening to rioting in India, what do you see? India used to have more than 100,000 riots a year. Today, that number is below 40,000. We are more peaceful today if measured objectively in terms of rioting, because it's an event that's unfolding on the streets, it's not at the borders. We are more peaceful today than we have been in the last 50 years. And when is the structural breakdown? Meaning, when does the trend break? The trend breaks in 90s. There is opportunity cost of violence. Is it because policing has become more effective, or we are spending more on police? No. There has not been that kind of an impact and change in policing. People have less tolerance for that much street violence now, which is often forgotten because we are all hyper-connected on the telephone, on mobile phones. So one riot is one too many. We all know about what happened in the riots in the recent few years because we are all connected. What we lose is a sense of objectivity that we used to have a lot. So if we speak to our parents, they'll tell you, there's so much rioting. Now it is a lot more peaceful. Next. This is crime against women, in particular rapes. Why do we study rape? Again, for the same reason, the definition has not changed. If you look at all the states of the Union, and the first graph on top is all India, you are seeing a structural break, meaning in the trend around 16, 17, 18, you are seeing a decline. Is this BJP? No, because if you see across different states, you are seeing whether the dispensation is Congress, BJP, JDU, whatever your political preference might be, you are seeing state after state after state. In fact, the only anomaly to this overall national trend is if you look at Rajasthan, Jharkhand, Haryana. And this is a long-term trend. Meaning those are places where we have not bucked the trend. Okay, we have to work harder in these places. But overall crime against women is declining very rapidly. Now, why did it happen around 16, 17, 18? Because you have something called, and this is based on a Lancet study, it's access to toilets was a major driver. A lot of crimes were associated with women going out for defecation. So toilets, Swachh Bharat, when we were promoting and talking about why toilets should be built, mostly we made health arguments, right? The motivation was infant mortality is high, fecal matter finds its way into the house through water, food, etc. So you need to make society open defecation free. But the most important unintended consequence of that is women's lives. You've had a reduction of 22% in the form of assaults on women. 14% reduction in rapes. These are very, very big changes. And these are changes which we aren't as familiar with. We aren't talking about it. But this is what quality of life is about. Toilet is a highly gendered problem. Next. Now, electricity. And while we were talking yesterday, if you were here, electrification is again one of those basic amenity which we want to provide everybody. So electrification means now you're on the grid, you will get electricity. The politics come into the form of how much free electricity. But leaving that aside, if you just look at what has happened to access to electricity, All India, the poorest 20%, only half of them had electricity until 14-15. Today that number is in 90s. Now, there is a government side of the story. The administration will tell you 100% electrification, because that is administrative data. If it goes into the basti, they are electrified. But survey data becomes more powerful because the households are self-reporting whether they have it or not. And even there you are close to 90-95%. So there is real change happening to the poorest segment of your society. Is it happening only for Hindus? Is it happening only for higher caste, lower caste? No. Everybody. In fact, the rise is a little bit higher for Muslim households. If you look at the survey data, these are 12 lakh self-reported survey data points. That is why I say it's objectively factual. It's not based on anecdote, or it's not even based on a government view. If you look at all different social classes, SCs, STs, religious groups, Hindus, Muslims, you can break the data the way you want. Everybody, and these are the poorest 20% in each of these categories, everybody has almost universal electrification. Next. This is the beautiful graph from a publication out of the IFPRI team that just got out in Nature that Anand also talked about yesterday. This is, if the top is how infant mortality has been declining, and the bottom is how access to any toilet has improved. Are you seeing that after 15-16, the last two graphs, they are highly correlated, right? The building of the toilets has led to saving of 60,000 babies a year. That's the kind of talks we... Yes, next. Now, what is happening in terms of actual spending of households? Everybody, in fact, the biggest increase you have had in the last 10 years in terms of spending per capita monthly expenditure, the biggest rise is of scheduled caste, 178%. Okay? Everybody is seeing very significant increase. So in some sense, we can say this is what inclusive growth is about. The top ballpark number of 8 to 10%, which attracts most media, that is just a very superficial understanding of what is happening in the economy. These are the real changes that we have to highlight, that it is inclusive growth. Next. I'm sorry this graph is, it's a beautiful graph. I really like it. You can't see it very well, but this is rural and that's urban. So rural and urban. This is telling you across all the states of the country, the bottom 20%, what is the ownership of vehicles? Bottom 20%. Ownership of vehicle, it used to be 6% 10 years back. Today it is 40%. Are you seeing the rise? And rural and urban. In fact, what you have to now worry about from a policy side, what now we have to think of, if 40% of your poorest rural households have bikes or scooters or three-wheelers or whatever, we have to now start thinking of amenities for those kind of. You have to have maybe traffic police in villages. Of course, your villages are no longer villages, what you thought of, but you are urbanizing very fast. People's lives are changing very fast. We have to now think of amenities and civic amenities, urban amenities in a pace that is real economy of India's change. Next. If you look at the poorest, just think of consuming fresh fruits. It's like a luxury. That's the general sense you have fresh fruits. This is the poorest 10% households. Just look at the increase. You had only 31% who had any form of fresh fruits 10 years back. Today, it's above 70. In fact, Chhattisgarh, 1% were consuming some form of milk. That number is now up to like 55 or whatever percent. Are you seeing the magnitude of the change? It's enormous. It's just that we are not putting it down in the form of real changes and talking about it so that people get to know. Next. There is one other subtle thing. For every household, you know what, on the y-axis you have months of the year. So fresh fruits we would consume in the certain months when they were available, and this is for everybody. And then the other months we didn't have fresh fruits because they were not locally available. Today, in fact, that is now 22-23, the second panel. Are you seeing everybody is consuming everything all the time in terms of fruits? So seasonality, reduction of seasonality, how does it happen? It's not just more money with people. It's availability. Availability and affordability. And you know where you are seeing some of the biggest increases? Northeast. The poorer parts of rural areas of India. Your poorest people are consuming diverse diets. That is what growth is about, that the quality of living is improving. Major changes in supply chain and logistics, refrigeration, transport. It has a direct bearing on lives of all citizens of this country. And I'm showing you the poorest just to drive home a point. Okay, next. So now what you have to appreciate is now we are no longer in the realm of national level policy making. A lot of our policy making has to be in the realm of precision policy making. Because your problems are localized, your solutions therefore have to be localized. Right? In fact, we had aspirational district program which was launched. Now we are doing aspirational blocks. Because your variations in pockets of problems are really just pockets, they are not Delhi level problems. Which means you need that local data, you need the expertise and the understanding to suggest local solutions. So it requires state capacity, and since yesterday I've been talking about how state capacity has to be enhanced. Digitization has helped us do a lot, but we need to do a lot more. Right? In fact, if you realize, a lot of your SDGs are no longer all India problem. Infant mortality, maternal mortality, they are concentrated on 7 to 10 states of this country. Many states have already achieved this. But in your minds, you're still thinking, oh, we are still an underdeveloped or best developing economy. That's not true. These are pockets that we have to deal with. All right. So precision policy making. Next. I'm going to show you some objective data, meaning it's as objective because there's no human involvement in this. This is satellite imagery. So satellite image makes you measure quite accurately 10 meter into 10 meter kind of high resolution data, and you can analyze now what is the nature of this growth. Next. You see, this is pre-15 and that is 15 to 20. The more redness there is, it means your growth local at district is more than 5% year on year real. So are you seeing how the redness is expanding? So your growth is not anymore limited to Delhi, Bombay, Hyderabad, Bangalore, urban areas. There is a massive, and the biggest increase in that redness is happening in northeast. If you look at poorer belts of Rajasthan, poorer belts of MP, these are all very, very backward and underdeveloped parts of the country where you are seeing growth. And this is growth built in terms of what is the built up area, because this is a satellite image, how many more built up surfaces are emerging? Highways, right? Tanks, housing societies, could be anything, but these are all built up area. We are growing at a very fast, unprecedented phase. Now typically growth happens highest at the lowest, and then you have a base effect, you begin to taper off. What you are seeing is post 2014 your growth has only picked up, and the GDP numbers are just one measure of it. This is on the ground, big changes. Next. So this is just a very dense, the left side that is under the Modi administration, compare that with UPA 2, UPA 1. UPA 2 and UPA 1 weren't very different in terms of growth. If you look at the Modi administration post 14, you are seeing there is a significant increase. Next. Where is the increase happening most? In the least developed parts of the country. That's why that orange line, all lines are downward sloping, meaning highest growth is in the least developed parts, everywhere. But on the orange line is meant to tell you it's much, much more under the Modi administration. Next. Now this is a graph which you might be well aware of, but it's very important to tell you. These are wealth distribution across country. Every red dot is 1,000 poor household. Every yellow dot is 1,000 middle class household, and every green dot is 1,000 rich household. This is by consumption, okay, wealth. What do you see? Does India have a north-south divide? Does India have a north-south divide as your media would often like you to believe? No. But you can draw a line from Srinagar to Kanyakumari. There is an east-west divide in the country. The west is far more affluent, there's far more greenery, and the east is far more red, which means that there's a concentration of poverty in the poorest, in the eastern part of the country. You're going to see this also in the future in terms of how the precision policy will play out. And Narega in Gujarat cannot be the same as Narega in Bihar and Assam. You are not going to find labor to come and till land. So that's why now a lot of these are highly localized. Why is the West more affluent? Because the West by design is far more industrialized. This was a decision made in the 50s and 60s that since the East is rich in natural resources, the processing must happen on the West. You don't want concentration of all economic activity. And industrialization begets further industrialization, modernization. new technology. So the West has continued to grow. So there is a historical trend to a lot of these things. Next. We are a very big, very diverse country, even economically. So you should not think of India as one big, singular economy. Every state has a lot of localized policy power. So the states are growing at very different rates. Okay? There are breakout states. Sikkim, Haryana, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Uttarakhand. These are states that are growing much, much faster than all India level. At the same time, there are states that are missing out on the growth, and I'll talk about it. Next. Next. This is the growth rate in the last 30 years. Do you see there is actually a state in this country which had negative growth rate? Now, negative growth rate is very rare to find anywhere. Not growing, one can understand. But what does negative growth rate mean? Negative growth rate means you're basically consuming the capital. Bihar's per capita income in 1991 and 2005, identical. This is the time when the rest of the country was growing very fast. So let's not pretend that we live in an economy, we live in a society where governance matters, politics matters. And this is part of the problem with our profession, which is economics, that we talk of efficiency and distribution and economics in general, assuming away politics and religion, society, we assume away these institutional realities in which an economy functions. Governance matters. So I don't need a rocket scientist to tell me what happened in Bihar in 1991, that it stagnated for 15 years. No change in per capita income. It actually fell and then grew to make it equal. Governments. Change in governments, governance, and an absolute, bucking the national trend. This is loot. So let's again talk of politics and local governance, because it is directly linked to your growth rate. Next. I want a little bit, just 2 minutes on, you have to understand public finances. At the national level, there is a difference between the NDAs, their approach to the fiscal deficit. They are very conservative, no? In fact, every projection every year is in the future, our trend is going to further continue downwards. We don't want to exceed a certain fiscal deficit, which means we really want to tie our hands down. We don't want a profligate state. But that's not the case everywhere. And let's not assume that is common sense and therefore economically the one that every party or every government follows. Look at the different states. Of the non-development spending that states do, interest payment, pensions and administrative expenses are your three biggest. Interest is one of the biggest. The red line is telling you all India average. The first state on top, that is Gujarat. The second is Tamil Nadu. Let's talk about Tamil Nadu. Are you seeing what has happened in Tamil Nadu? Of course, they have managed to reduce their interest burden, but now the blue bars are increasing the red bars, which means interest burden on the state of Tamil Nadu is far outweighing the national burden of interest, right? If you continue, the last state on the top row is Kerala. Just look at the blue bars. It's out of control now. So then you go to Supreme Court. You want changes in rules. You want one-time money. But fiscal federalism requires discipline at all levels. We cannot only be talking about fiscal deficit at the center level. States have to pull their weight. If you continue to see, at the bottom you see the third row, the last, that is Punjab. The blue bars far exceed. Interest burden is crazy. Very, very high. Okay. West Bengal, just before that, again, hugely problematic. Next. If you see pensions, in fact, the second state on top is Tamil Nadu. Look at the blue bars. It's crazy. How are you going to service these? People will retire and seek and they are going to claim. You are far exceeding what the general trend in the country is. Look at Kerala, the top, last vertical. Pension burden is enormous. Now, Kerala is older. But this kind of pension burden is not sustainable. Meaning you have to have that kind of growth to be able to pay people. After all, we are aging. We are a young country, but we have 120 million people above the age of 60. These kind of burdens are serious, very, very big problems. Next. A little bit on capital outlay. What is capital outlay? The kind of money you're spending on building of capital, sort of capital expenditure for the long term. So what kind of infrastructure are you building? You see, the interesting thing is, you see Gujarat, the first on the, by the way, there is a rank ordering by growth rates. That's why they are ordered like this. Gujarat is the first one. You see the blue bars are far outweighing the red, meaning Gujarat's outlay, capital outlay, which will determine long-term growth, even future long-term growth, is very robust because their capital outlay continues to be very high. Tamil Nadu is keeping with the national trend. And then you look at states, if you go down, look at, in fact, Delhi. Delhi is right, it's the center in the second row. Delhi blue bars used to be very high until 10 years back. It used to be a positive outlier. Delhi had great infrastructure investment. But in the last 10 years, it has become a negative outlier, meaning it's much, much below national spending on capital outlay. And if you go to Delhi, you see the infrastructure, you understand. What is happening with the infrastructure in Delhi? Why have we stopped spending money on maintenance of basic infrastructure? Because we are not spending any money. All right? And you will see similar trends across some of the other states as well. Next. West Bengal is also a problem. Now, here I want to tell you the story of Punjab because it is fundamentally, there's a very strong economic story here. Punjab is the black, solid, bold line. Punjab used to be the richest state in India 20 years back. So not that time, not long time, just 20 years back. Per capita income, richest state. Today, do you see all these states now are far, far superior economically. So Punjab is also growing because this is India, everybody's growing. It's the relative growth that is the real story. The neighbors to Punjab, like Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, are now almost twice as rich, average, every person, twice as rich. This is not an accident. These are policy choices made by states. So the problem with cross-subsidizing agriculture, these are agricultural states, right? So you want to promote that state. So you're diverting a lot of resources there. But where will your resources come from? It typically comes from industry or services. That is the source of revenue. If you're going to cross-subsidize to an extent that you kill the golden egg laying goose, what happens? Industry has all moved out of Punjab. And where have they gone? To China, Vietnam? No, they have gone to Haryana, they have gone to Himachal Pradesh, some have come here. So deindustrialization at a time when we are talking about make in India, industrialization, manufacturing growth, we have pockets and Punjab therefore becomes a very important case study. That what is the future source of growth going to be? And the things that Anand spoke about, agriculture not of any kind, not of the nature which Madhya Pradesh and Bihar are doing, which is diversifying into newer forms of crop. They are still growing rice and wheat. They have first of all no business growing rice because there is no adequate rain. It's not a rain-bearing area. It's free diesel. So you can drill the land dry. So Punjab today has active desertification. Active desertification. It really bothers you because this is a long-term, not just, it's not just a small economic problem. These are generational problems. These are ecological disasters waiting to happen. But we are a large federal country. States have a lot of power and people want to decide locally on a lot of these things. But we have pockets where growth of this nature is unsustainable. Next. A little bit on labor markets because everybody is concerned about labor markets. The right side panel is labor force participation and the left side is unemployment. They are two very different concepts. Labor force participation talks about people in the working age of 18 to 50, 59, who are either working or looking for work. The labor force participation in China for the last 40-year average, 75%. So 3 out of 4 people are either working or looking for work. In Vietnam, it was around 72, 73%. Bangladesh, close to 60%. Ours, until 5 years back, was barely 50%. Today, it is around 57%. Now, that is a very strange anomaly for a young, growing country to have almost half your population working age, neither working nor looking for work. Do you see how much of it's a real structural problem? Why are people neither working nor seeking work at this age? And in a minute, I'll give you some sense of it. While on the left side, you have unemployment, people seeking work but not finding it. Now, you talk of all India unemployment level. And unfortunately, a lot of public debates rests on only at that level. The 3% is the overall national average. Why is it 3%? It has increased or decreased. The real story is look at the variations across your states. Your fast growing states like Gujarat, Karnataka, Chhattisgarh, etc., you have 0.9, 1.5. Look at the unemployment rates. It's very, very low. While look at Kerala. Kerala is 12.5. So it's a multiple of the national average. So then it makes you wonder, कि क्या हो रहा है? Well, the simple truth is, job creation is an outcome of wealth creation. We need to be business friendly, we need to be growth friendly if we want job creation. Because what is the alternate story? We want government to give jobs, which means everybody is seeking government jobs. I'll tell you, one of the states, Nagaland, 11% of the population is government employees. So basically it's telling you every household, the real growth model there for household is sarkari naukri. You're seeing very little growth there. In fact, the good comparison is Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has just been through, or it's still going through, an economic upheaval. And you know what is the problem? The resistance to real economic reforms there? 10% of Sri Lankan population is employed with the state, with the government. They don't want those changes which you have to bring about, unfortunately, if you care for long-term growth. So government jobs is not going to lead to future growth. We need the government to expand. We need the government to have capacity. After all, since yesterday I'm talking about government. We need more doctors. We need more nurses. We need more teachers. We need a lot more government employees. We have one of the smallest Ministry of External Affairs to manage global affairs. So we need to expand, but not the way we are thinking of job creation, which is from the government. We need that growth, which is going to lead to jobs. Yes, next. This is unemployment rate. You can see it is declining for 15. And you see youth unemployment. So the second graph is for youth, people under the age of 30. So regular unemployment for people in working age is around 4.1. For youth, it is 12 point something. So youth today are far more inactive. That's an OECD IMF term. Youth inactivity is a global phenomenon. People under the age of 30 don't want to work anywhere. They are waiting for the right job. It's a global phenomenon. They are waiting for the appropriate job to happen. Partly it is because as you grow, you can wait. Yeah, nobody is dying of hunger today, so you can wait for the right job. Next. And this is where the story gets interesting. If you look at the unemployment rate of people below 30, that is the red bar, and above 30, that is your grey bar. What is happening across all states of the country? Young people are at least 5 times as unemployed as people above the age of 30. How is that possible? Is it really shortage of jobs then? What happens? Do the jobs suddenly appear at the age of 30? No. Basically, your family, your parents are telling you, bus, now please go out and do something with your lives. The other is, we are also spending a lot of time taking exams. Taking exams for the right jobs. And why do I say that? Next slide, please. These are all young people now. There are no older people in this analysis. The red bars are people who are young, who have graduate and above degree. This is the most educated segment of your society, compared to young people who have school education, school and below. Do you see the difference between the red and the grey bars? Your most educated people are very likely to be sitting at home. Your least educated people are working. Now, if you have almost all your industry surveys are telling you that today the shortage or the constraint to our growth is no longer capital. We can raise finance. Banks are willing to give money. Equity markets are giving us money. We have money. The biggest shortage to our growth is skilled manpower. We just can't find skilled people. Now, how can the two things coexist? It's anomalous, no? Your most educated are sitting at home and your firms can't find educated people. That is a strange imbalance. But the way to understand is because there is a big dissonance. There's a gap between a degree and actual skill. Industry is not going to pay you for your degree. Industry values skill. So there is a skill degree gap which we are trying to bridge through Skill India, through the new education policy, where you want factories to come into the classroom, classrooms to go to the shop floors. We need our students to get real skills. Right? The second is, and this is a more difficult one, expectations. People expect an appropriate job when they have a degree. So they will wait. They will continue to take exams. And there is a fascinating new research that has just been published just a couple of months back. There is a natural experiment which emerged in Tamil Nadu for government jobs. They froze government job hiring for about 4 or 5 years. So what they have is, they have cohorts who are preparing and suddenly the job was frozen. 5 years later, you're trying to compare lifetime earnings of these different kinds of people. And you know what you find? People who spend X number of years preparing for exams, their lifetime earnings are lower. Meaning, when you spend your most productive time of your life, the time when you can actually acquire skills, you are writing exams, you are first acceptance into government jobs, into most jobs. Acceptance rate is low. So the probability of getting in is 0.0 something. So everybody else who did not get through, the average lifetime earnings is going to be lower. So the guys who did not prepare and continued in the private sector or continued doing what they were doing, their lifetime earnings are higher. Now, do you realize what this means? That preparing for government jobs beyond a certain number of years is really detrimental to people, to you, your long-term earnings. Your actual quality of life is getting impacted. So what is this fetish then for government jobs? We have to de-glamorize government jobs. The search for safety. But you know, growth never comes from safety. I hope you know that. Growth comes from taking risks, from entrepreneurship. And this is, for me, one of the biggest highlights of teaching in business schools and all, is that when we were in colleges and school, the cool kids used to have bands and guitars and sing. Now the cool kids in business schools and a lot of tech institutions, they have startup ideas. They want to do something. They want to take digital solutions to health, to education, to ag tech, fintech. And that is where I see the hope. That the younger generation gradually in certain pockets in the country are moving away from government jobs. Unfortunately, it's the states where you're not seeing big growth happen, where the extreme fascination with government jobs continue to happen. So we have to demystify government jobs, but at the same time encourage youngsters to take risk and encourage the parents and the sort of the older generation to be a little more easygoing on failure. Failure is not a bad thing. Failure is just more experience till you become successful. Okay, so risk taking has to be encouraged. We cannot frown upon children, students who want to try new things. Next. Manufacturing. A large part of this gap is also because, you know, till 10 years back, when I moved to Delhi, the conversation used to be, India has missed the manufacturing bus. It's a very common phrase you would hear people say. Up to China is making everything very cheap, so why should we do it? Number one. And now we can't do it. But the reason it remained a very myopic thinking, and why with this administration we had to do a 180-degree turn, is you have to bring back manufacturing into the center of your economy. Number one, it is linked to job creation. No country has moved hundreds of millions of people from agriculture to services. So you need to do it. Secondly, China is anyway going to lose competitive advantage because China is getting old before it has become rich. It's a real crisis for them. We are still in that sweet spot. So manufacturing has to become the center. All right, next. This is the story on narrative economics, 30 seconds on this. This is GDELT data, global Google data of more than 100 languages, global media, different countries, all media, that is on Google. What do you notice? In the beginning of the pandemic, all major economies, India, China, Sweden, Germany, everybody is getting negative coverage. These are tone of the media. So everybody is getting negative coverage because media's job is to cover bad news. What happens within 6 months of the pandemic? The global media's coverage of China, that is the red bar on top. Do you see how it has become positive? So you can use natural language processing. Data is very powerful, hundreds of millions of data points. It's telling you there is a campaign, there's a global campaign. To those of you who are thinking this is Chinese media, so you can censor it and become positive, no. This is media in New Zealand, Ecuador, Ghana, India, covering China. So all the media of the world, on an average, they are saying good things, great things about China. It doesn't happen. It has never happened. In economics, we call it narrative economics. There's a wonderful book by Robert Shiller who talks about narrative economics. So today's reality, global geoeconomics is narratives. There's a lot of narratives. And as India continues to grow, you will see attack on your institutions. You're going to see a lot of narrative battles. Next. Data is powerful. It tells you where is the bad news coming from. So you see the bottom red, the black bar. That is unknown sources. So the most negative news on China, on India comes from unknown sources. And guess where the most positive news on India comes, China comes from? Unknown sources. So these are stories that are being planted. If you look at the data well, you can see what this is. And of course, I'm only looking at India and China. It'll be wonderful to all look at what's happening with the US. Right? A lot of this is, we are not in the reality of objective truth. Media is not telling us objective. It's giving you opinions of people. It's driving narratives. And I think that is, it's dangerous for democracies, but it's a reality. So we have to have a counter strategy. It's very important. Next. Because Pradeep spoke about it yesterday, I have added 3 more slides to this, something which got a lot of you very interested. And so I'm going to show you certain things that's happening in the Indian economy. You know, we are a democracy. A lot depends on demography. It's very, very important. If you look at things from a national level, then the changes are there, but national level conversations they're not very interesting. The real action is happening at the local level. So if you look at overall shares of different populations, you are seeing, okay, the Hindu population has reduced by 0.66 percentage point. Shares of Muslims has increased by 0.8. Share of Christians has reduced. Share of Sikhs has reduced. Now from this slide, the one thing I want you to take away is the share of religion not stated. People who now do not believe in religion or who are not reporting religion. That has had the biggest increase. So that is also a reality today. All right, next. Now I'm showing you different panels across the country. How are shares of populations changing? The one on the left is for Hindus, the one on the right is for Muslims. Red is negative growth, blue is positive growth. The darker blue, the more positive, the darker red, more negative. What you overwhelmingly see is across all states, all districts, these are districts. You are seeing the Hindu population more or less decrease everywhere. But some of the biggest decrease in your shares have happened in those deep red pockets, right, which is the northeast. There's a lot happening even at the border of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, southern Karnataka. There is a lot happening in the tribal belts. If you look at the Muslim population share, it's increasing overwhelmingly everywhere, but it is increasing more in certain parts like Assam. If you look at West Bengal, parts of Rajasthan and Haryana, right? And you have northern Kerala, etc. So these trends are emerging, by the way. We can see them. Next. Similarly, you have for Christians and Sikhs. Christians, if you see, there is a blueness, there's an increase. But where is the biggest blue happening? Northeast. Next. Fundamentally, these religions practice different kinds. Their lives are different. If I ask you on an average, how much time is spent on religious activity, the tall red one, the green bars are Muslims. You see, that's the kind of time people in the Muslim community spend on religious activities. The orange is Buddhism, and the smallest bars throughout are Hindus. So on an average, when you asked yesterday what is one to do about it, first of all, you're not really spending much time on your religion, number one. Number two, let's go next. And this is across age groups, okay? This is across age group. These are the amount of time spent across age group on collective religious activities. Meaning you're doing this in groups. The first panel on top is Christianity. Across age group, everyone in Christianity, the children more, but there is not that much of a variation between children, spending time on collective religious activities. The top right bar, the graph is for Hindus. Do you see it is the least? And we are doing some amount of spending time, at least the children are being taught certain things, but it is not like older Hindu population is particularly religious or spending more time. We are not spending time on religious activities. The bottom left panel is Islam. The time spent, men, collective activities far, far more than women. Women are very little. So in Islam, religiosity in terms of practice is fundamentally a male phenomenon. And last one is Sikhs. Sikhs you do see higher compared to Hindus, but again it's similar to the Hindus. Next, this is the big takeaway as far as Pradeep's talk was concerned, because I want you to be sensitive to this fact. Why does it matter in a democracy that we have different people living together, the changes are happening the way they are happening? Should we be worried? No, number one. But number two, democracy is about taking care or giving rights to minorities, because otherwise every country will get taken over by majority, right? But the problem is, how do you define minority? Are minority rights in places where Hindus are minorities well protected? Are they feeling as safe in places where they are minority? After all, most of your conversation on religion is limited at a national level. So we think of national minorities. The minute you begin to see local, district level, then we are seeing that there is a difference between a Hindu majority versus a Christian or a Muslim majority. How do I and why do I care about it? Because I see there is a direct impact on diversity of people within that district. When a cluster is Muslim majority, you are seeing a 5 times reduction in diversity. And this kind of reduction in diversity cannot happen simply through fertility increases or conversion necessarily. You also have a significant proportions of Hindu moving away from these kind of districts. There are multiple things happening. Internal migration is a problem. Similarly, if you look at Christian, and 5 times, mind you, this is not 5% or 50, this is 5 times reduction in diversity. So what is happening to minorities in Muslim cluster is the question to ask. Why are they running away? What kind of law and order issues are there? What is happening to quality of life and fundamental democratic principles which we extend to citizens of this country? What about Christian clusters? In Christian clusters, diversity is reducing 3.5 times faster. This is all relative to Hindu clusters, where more than 80% are Hindus. Mixed cluster, there also you are seeing a major reduction in diversity. So in mixed cluster where Hindus are 50% and some other religion is 20 to 30%, these are mixed. So nobody has more than 50, let's say. There also you are seeing a 2.5 times reduction in diversity. So while your diversity is maintained in your Hindu clusters, it is declining very rapidly in clusters which are non-Hindu. Therefore, it is a democratic concern. It is a fundamental governance concern also. That are the rights of minorities at the local places, let's say district, because district is an administrative unit where you're supposed to take care of certain administrative concerns. Why are we seeing this kind of phenomena? I don't have easy answers for you, but clearly it is not only linked to fertility. Even in places where fertility of all religions might be declining, it is the relative fertility rates that is going to determine the shares, and democracy is about shares, right? Which is why we have to really think harder about reduction in diversity being a problem. We don't want people, and these are odds ratios. Next, and this is the last slide. There are different ways to measure diversity, okay? In economics, we have Herfindahl, Hirschman index. We also have a Shannon index. Shannon index comes from looking at biosphere and how many different kinds of species you have. So reduction in number of species, you can use this modern technology and modern statistical and econometric methods are available for us to study what are very concerning social issues. So do we value diversity for its own sake? Should we value? Should people run away under duress? Are these differences in practices, in day-to-day living, are they emerging as concerns? It appears it is. And now we are in a position to measure it. What you are seeing here is a reduction. The biggest reductions are in Christian majority and Muslim majority. That's the blue bar shifting. The bigger the shift from that line, it tells you bigger the reduction in diversity. Next, last. Why is all of this important? Because otherwise it remains, when you make a concern, when you articulate a concern, it is mostly treated as, no, this is not true. You may feel this is, hamare yahan to aisa nahi hai. No, things are much better in Delhi, Maybe it's a problem in Bombay. No, that is anecdotal. That's why data becomes very powerful. In fact, I was personally quite surprised when I wrote this paper on global status of minorities of 169 countries. You look at what is the stature or what is the status of minority. Are they expanding in share? Are they reducing? India is the only country in this neighborhood where minority share is actually increasing. So in that sense, we are like the Western liberal democracies. We are open. I was a little bit stunned at the reaction that paper got. It's fact. It's happening. No, this is not happening. This is all about fertility. Muslim fertility is declining. Why are you concerned? It doesn't matter if it is decreasing. As I said, even negative shares will determine the proportions. You can all be decreasing, but at the end of the day, who's increasing fast is the problem. And Hindu fertility is decreasing. India is already below replacement rate. We are at 2.03, no longer 2.1. So our fertility has decreased, but it's not decreasing for everyone at the same rate. And that is a concern. But this is not about fertility. Fertility is a long-term phenomenon. This is about other kinds of pressures. Diversity in terms of migration, internal migration, people fleeing, conversion. 22 countries in Africa had animism as the majority religion 50 years back. Today, none of them have animism as a majority religion. So let's not pretend that these things do not matter. And economics is the sterile view of economy, people living in economy, as if we don't have institutional reality, right? So we have to, the reason I think somebody asked Pradeep yesterday, we know all this, what are we to do? One, we don't know all this. The fact that you can openly and scientifically talk about these things is a first step. So I remember one of the southern prominent newspaper wrote an editorial on that article. Oh, this is old wine, new bottle. Then why are you so worried? If it is old news, why are we so worried? Why is talking about something which is factually the first step to even tackling a concern? Is it a concern? To me, reduction of diversity is a concern. The lack of protection to minorities locally is a concern. After all, why is it that in Hindu clusters you are not seeing reduction in diversity? Because in those clusters the minority rights are protected, they are preserved. Why is it that it is not the same in other clusters? You see, those become the bigger democratic problems. So we have to define them, address them. Factually, please accept certain reality, but to those of you interested, you must know the right language to use also. That's why research is very important. Okay? Thank you. Everything is based out of big research papers. I have just shown you the tip of the iceberg. There are big, long manuscripts behind it. Thank you very much.